So, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining me for what I believe now is my third episode of Newsday Tuesday with DrCathyO Live. I try to pay close attention to everything that's happening in the news and follow educational research and use that as the premise for how I talk to you all about the impact of what's happening in our culture, the broader culture, the national global landscape, the impact of that on teaching and learning in the classroom. So I do need to apologize to you for missing last Tuesday. It was a difficult time for me, and I'm sure you know, a difficult time for most people across the country after the video capture of the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. I think the whole country, and now we know the whole globe, has been sort of spiraling in different ways and how they both deal with and respond to the footage that we have seen. Um, it brought to mind something that I think is critical both for parents and teachers and everyone out there in terms of the hidden curriculum. You may not have heard about this, but it's the hidden curriculum. I talk about this a lot with my students in the college courses that I teach, and also with a lot of the professional educators that I deal with around school improvement and problem solving. And so the hidden curriculum is work written by Paulo Freire, theorist in education, very well respected, and certainly so much of what he has written years ago underpins my own work as an accomplished teaching practitioner in the classroom. And so I was thinking what would be appropriate both for the pandemic and the national crisis surrounding police brutality that we're dealing with is to kind of talk about how we all have a hidden curriculum. In Paulo Freire's work, he talks about how teaching and education and informing others, even if you're not a teacher or professional educator, is supported by and stands upon all of your own personal and cultural beliefs and attitudes and responses to what you see going on around you. And so, whether you know it or not, whether you're a teacher, a policymaker, a principal, a business owner, some other school leader, an entrepreneur, an edupreneur, a parent, a public citizen, which would include all of us, regardless of your path, your profession, your walk in life, you have a hidden curriculum. That's all of the things that you teach, or Parker Palmer would say, what your life speaks that doesn't necessarily come out of your mouth. In my own classroom, my curriculum was put forth by what was in my lesson plans and what was designed for that time of learning. But in my life as well, I have a hidden curriculum. It's who we are, and it's what we teach and show and model and demonstrate to others without having to say it. It has a lot to do with character. It also has a lot to do with motive and any of our own personal agendas. So that's the hidden curriculum that Paulo Freire talks about. Students in the classroom know how teachers feel about them without the teacher even having to say it. You know how someone feels about you without that person having to actually say it. You know a lot about what they believe, what they think, what they feel, things that they would and would not do based on their hidden curriculum. They don't have to say it out of their mouth. It's just that what they do and how they conduct themselves lets you know who they are on the inside and what they really believe about life and relationships and other matters. That's the hidden curriculum. In my own teaching, particularly in the K-12 environment, I was a high school English teacher, also taught writing and journalism and the forensics team at one point. But even though that was the standard course of study or textbook curriculum that I was teaching, there are a lot of things about my own personal values, principles, and beliefs that came through in just my presence and my way of being in the classroom. That was my hidden curriculum. I have students who still say to me now, how I made an impact on their lives, not by what I said, not by lessons I was teaching from our textbook, but by how I lived, how I conducted myself, how I managed relationships, how I interacted with people. That was my hidden curriculum. So I think this is a great time nationally for all of us to really think about our own hidden curriculum. And I don't want it to just be about character and who we are, when no one's looking. I mean, what we are saying to people by how we conduct ourselves, not just what comes out of our mouth, not just our verbal expression. So I want to share a brief little excerpt with you from Paulo Freire's work. This is called Teachers as Cultural Workers, Letters to Those Who Dare to Teach. But what he says is so poignant for today's time, everything that's happening in our country and across the world, that stems from not just Minneapolis, but other areas. Everything we're seeing about what's happening in Buffalo, New York, and Atlanta, Georgia, and New Jersey, the list just goes on and on. But listen to what he says to teachers about their cultural work and their cultural presence and its connection to their hidden curriculum, agenda, motives, ideas, intentions. He says, to the extent that I become clearer about my choices and my dreams, which are substantively political, but also attributively pedagogical. And to the extent that I recognize that though an educator, I am also a political agent, I can better understand why I fear and realize how far we still have to go to improve our democracy. Listen to this. I also understand that as we put into practice an education that critically provokes the learner's consciousness, we are necessarily working against myths that deform us. As we confront such myths, we also face the dominant power because those myths are nothing but the expression of this power and its ideology. Listen, what he's saying is it is our job. Now, he's talking to teachers as cultural workers who have to understand students' backgrounds may be different from theirs. But what he's saying to our democracy at large is that we have to take responsibility for our own consciousness and the consciousness that we raise in other people. That is so powerful because I am personally affected by what is and isn't happening with student learners during this pandemic as they're all finishing up the school year, having been online now for 3 or 4 months, and perhaps going back to school this fall to an online environment as well, which is good. Online teaching and online education is a good thing, but the social emotional interaction is absolutely limited in many ways. And there's a reason why coming together in a group matters. Whether you're doing that in church, whether you're doing that with your family, whether you're doing that for a wedding, whether you're doing it in the Senate, for whatever reason, a board meeting, there is value in coming together face to face. And so you can't accomplish necessarily everything in an online environment. You can be successful and effective, but there are some things you lose from that social emotional perspective. So in this excerpt from Paulo Freire, he's saying that we have this responsibility of being aware of our own consciousness and raising that in the students that we teach. And I would say that you all, as parents, have that same responsibility. And other national leaders, local leaders, ecumenical leaders also have that responsibility of raising a consciousness. I love that some governors have said, I am not going to rush to open up everything in the state. I'm not only paying attention to numbers, but I'm concerned about the people that I serve personally, what this means for families and their children. I understand what it means for the economy, and I understand what it means for business owners, but I'm not going to be in a rush to do this. If you've watched Cuomo on any of his talks on CNN, then you've heard him share and put forth his hidden curriculum, his critical consciousness about how to deal with what they've been faced with in New York and what some of the challenges have been, both for the medical profession and everyone else that's been impacted. So this issue we're now seeing with George Floyd is another thing that raises our consciousness. And so, in an assessment of our own hidden curriculum, what consciousness does it raise? How have you changed? How have you been impacted? What has the effect been on you and or your family? What have you been thinking during this time as you've been watching the news and watching the protests? I was watching some pieces this morning from different news reports, and it just looked like the crossing of the Red Sea in LA, in Philadelphia, but also in little small towns as well. We've just seen just a sea of people who are peacefully marching and protesting against police brutality and for police reform, and that has a lot of value and it sends a strong message. The people who are marching in their masks and saying nothing, they're not raising a sign, they're not chanting, they're saying nothing. Those voices have a hidden curriculum. Just their involvement shows that they're not complicit, and their being there, their presence sends a message. So I think what I'm trying to say for both educators and parents out there is that this is a critical time to raise our own consciousness, and we have a responsibility. Educators at all levels of the continuum, you have a responsibility to raise consciousness for everyone that you serve. School leaders, teachers, students, parents, and everyone in your community at large. It is true for policymakers. It is true for parishioners. You have a personal responsibility as a human being to raise your own consciousness, and those of us who teach are responsible for raising that consciousness for others. I've been watching a few segments by Rachel Maddow, and she gives these announcements that she's getting ready to show footage that might make some people uncomfortable. And so if you don't want to watch, she says, then you can get up and move to another room or situate yourself so that you can't see or hear the television. I'm going to count to 3, and then I'm going to show the footage. So she's giving warning of this video footage that she's going to show, but at the same time, she's raising consciousness in her show by saying, I'm going to show you what this real thing is. Respond to it however you wish. You can think whatever you want to think about it, but I have a responsibility to make you aware or raise your consciousness. So what I read today comes from Paulo Freire's article, Teachers as Cultural Workers. But if you've read any of his work about the hidden curriculum, as you heard me say just now, it is certainly the premise of all the work that I do, because I want to be very aware that you're not listening to just what I'm saying, but you're listening to what I'm not saying, because what I'm not saying, just my way of being, presents a whole message as well. Remember times in your youth when, and if you had a mama like mine, then you had a mother who would just give you the look. And that look might have had 10 different interpretations, but somehow in that moment, you knew exactly what she meant. You knew when the look meant, good job, I'm proud of you. You knew when the look meant, when we get home, you are in some kind of trouble. You knew when the look meant, if I have to speak to you one more time, if I have to count to 3, you're going to be sorry, my friend. You just knew from the look what the message really was, because you had a raised level of consciousness about exactly what she was trying to convey. That's what we see happening across the country now in response to racism. But that is what we cannot leave out of the classroom. We thought that we were going back to school, not doing business as usual because of the impact of the pandemic. I'm reminding you that we're not doing business as usual in school, in church, in our local businesses, in politics as well, not just because of the pandemic, but also because of the global protest and the global response to racism. Did you hear what Representative Bass said this morning? Did you read what she wrote? You have to go back and look at that article about the timing now. But let us, as we move forward, raise consciousness when we're teaching our students, when you as parents and grandparents are dealing with your children, raise their consciousness. You have to answer questions. I hear parents say a lot of times, my child asks so many questions, and it's easy to say because I said so. It's better to give the information in the best way that you can articulate it, because you're extending their knowledge, you're awakening their cognitive development, and you're most certainly raising their consciousness. I'm challenging you all today, particularly those of you watching me who are educators, to raise your own consciousness and awareness so you can now do that for the students that you teach. Whatever school looks like, when students go back to school this fall, you have to be doing something more, something better, something different than what you've done before. And I'm just admonishing you today, based on Paulo Freire's work, to do it with a new and improved and much more informed level of consciousness. So thank you for listening in for Newsday Tuesday, live with Dr. O, where I take current events and education in the news, share with you how it impacts the classroom, how you might want to think about it, massage it, let it marinate in your mind or whatever, how it can help you move education forward in your classroom or for students in your community. Even if you're not an educator, you can follow me at DrCathyO on all social media, or visit me on my website, DrCathyO.com, also effectivetoday.org. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you will continue to listen and engage in some dialogue with me about what we can do to improve schools from the inside out. Have a good afternoon.